Start. So thank you, Greg, and welcome everyone. I'm going to just start by thanking Julie and Stephanie for their presence tonight and expertise. And I'm going to ask them to just present themselves briefly. Julie, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Julie Stoner. I'm actually in Oklahoma. I have students all over the country. I am a professional member of the Association of Educational Therapists. I have a master's degree in education, focusing on student support and special populations. I'm also certified as an ADHD educator and an executive function coach. Benedicte wanted me to say, like, I work with students between the ages of 6 and 18. All of my current students have learning differences, and I have students in private school, public school, and homeschool.
Perfect, thank you. Stephanie?
Okay. Yes, hi, I'm Stephanie Scholler. I too am a professional member of the Association of Educational Therapists. A little bit about me, I started tutoring English and teaching English as a second language and foreign language to adult students when I was finishing an undergraduate degree in music. And so I also taught musical theater. But in the mid-200s, I completed my Master's of Education at Holy Names University and a certification in educational therapy. I also have a certification in assistive technology, ESL, and college counseling and advising. Let's see, questions you wanted to know were, my practice is in Berkeley. Of course, during COVID, I went online, but I usually see students now in person. I work with students, I'd say as young as 3rd grade, but more typically, since I cover mathematics, reading and writing, I work a lot with middle school, high school students, and sometimes college and graduate students, because I'm located really close to UC Berkeley.
Mm-hmm. Perfect,
Yeah.
Thank you. And our third panelist was also bilingual, I mean multilingual. So we just wanted to let you know that we also have, educational therapists in different languages in our area, or so they can also work with us. We can start with the first question that we thought would be a good introduction, which is what is the difference between a tutor, an educational therapist, and maybe a learning specialist? You want to, Stephanie, maybe?
Would you like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a couple things to think about. When I hear the word learning specialist, I tend to think of school-based services, and I have worked as a learning specialist in several independent schools. And one of the things there is that I rarely do one-on-one work. I did work at a school where I was able to do small group or one-on-one work, but often a learning specialist, in my experience, is being a case manager for students. It's running study halls. It's interfacing with the teachers. It's holding meetings for the families. And sometimes, oftentimes, we're referring out to educational specialists or tutors to take on the more individualized one-on-one support that a student needs. So in the capacity as an ed therapist, you're looking at doing individualized, targeted, personalized intervention and support in the big areas, which are math, reading, writing, and sometimes in executive function. A tutor often is content-based, and I should share that because I work with high school students, I also will tutor when I'm covering Algebra 1. I might see students that do not have a learning disability and they just need support getting through a course, or they might come to me to work on AP rhetoric and literature classes in high school. So but when I am working with a student in a more tutorial function, I share that information with the family. We're clear about the goals. And one last thing, I think an educational therapist tends to make a remediation plan. And you talk a lot with the team and work with the family about what that looks like. Yeah.
Do you have something else to add, Julie? Or?
Yeah, I was going to add, like, a learning specialist often doesn't have the same credentialing that an educational therapist has.
Oh, that's true.
Like Stephanie said, so tutors would be specializing in specific subject areas, and a educational therapist is looking at the whole student. Stephanie mentioned remediation. My practice actually is less remediation and more like identity work. So I think that there's some variations in what an educational therapist offers beyond being a learning specialist or a tutor, although those are hats that I wear in my practice also.
Mm-hmm. So when somebody is coming for the first consultation, what does the student need? Do you require any prior evaluation? What is the onboarding process? Maybe Julie?
So I'm sure this is different for everybody. My onboarding process usually starts with an inquiry. So then I'll send out an FAQ or my philosophy so that parents know what services I'm providing. And then I'll meet with the parents to kind of see what's going on with the student, what their expectations are. I want to meet with the student before I start any services. I definitely need student buy-in. Like, most struggling students are not really looking for one more thing to add to their school day. So I need to make sure they're on board and that they want to spend time with me doing the work. As far as evaluations, I don't have anything specific that I need. I will ask to see previous documentation of assessments, or if they have diagnosis or not, just to kind of get an idea of where to get started, what I'm looking for, and if I am a good fit for that student, if I have services to provide support, or if I need to refer them to somebody else.
Do you want to share, Stephanie, if you have, your onboarding process?
Sure. I think relatively similar to Julie's. Typically, a family, either a student is referred to me by a learning specialist at a school to give more individualized support, or a family knows about me through the AET website or my Soon website. And during that process, what I typically ask families to do prior to meeting for a 30-minute consultation, which can be in person or on Zoom, I will ask them to send me work samples. I love to see work samples, especially if a student's coming to me for writing. I'd like to see how they synthesize information, and any prior assessments and evaluations, IEPs, 504 plans, neuropsychology reports, or psychoed assessments. And then if a family feels comfortable sharing that within the beginning, I meet with the family. And part of it is getting an idea of tentative goals and areas of support, and also clarifying whether we're going to work for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a week, and setting expectations around that. And then, of course, like Julie said too, it's scheduling a meeting with that student to see if it's a match. And that might be 1 or 2 times, because you want to make sure that that student feels comfortable with you and vice versa. And that's very important, at which point then you usually move forward for a semester and go from there.
Do you do any assessment yourself? Can a family ask you to do some assessment, or administer any kind of evaluation?
Well, Julie can jump into this too. I certainly do. But I'm careful to do academic evaluations. I also do informal evaluation. I sometimes make for mathematics or for writing. I'll often ask for a student to give me a writing sample, or I'll see them. A lot of my work is observing how they work through a problem set. So yes, I can do in-person evaluations, and and do brief assessments, but I'm careful not to overstep the line. I don't do cognitive or a lot of the processing tests.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Julie,
Yeah.
do you? Yeah.
The same. So most of my assessments would be informal. I want to see how they approach work. I want to see what their patterns are, how they're thinking through things. So much assessment through dialogue, through the conversation of how they're reporting back to me about their thinking. There are some more formal evaluations that I can provide, but that's usually pretty rare. Usually you're getting those testing and evaluations through like a neuropsych report or something more formal. Educational therapists are not diagnosticians, so we don't offer diagnosis.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to share sometimes, like if a student's coming to me for reading, I will or morphology, the study of a higher level of looking at word patterns and spelling. I will often, for example, if I'm going to use a specialized multisensory program like Seeing Stars or Wilson or Orton Gillingham, I will then take them through a reading assessment, spelling assessment, et cetera, that's based on that. So I can put them in the appropriate level of a program.
Great, great. So what a session looks like? If maybe we can pretend an elementary school and a middle schooler. I don't know, which one do you want? Yeah. Stephanie,
Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Julie, go.
Okay, Julie.
Typically sessions, I schedule them for 45 minutes. I'm kind of a talker, so sometimes we go long, but there's always a check-in, no matter what the age is. Like, how was your day? How was school today? Is there anything pressing for you that we need to talk about? Do you have any homework tonight? So I'm always trying to add value to their time, which often in the moment is not necessarily directly related. I mean, it is related, but it isn't exactly the long-term goals that we have set. But, right there in that moment, something might be pressing. So every session is different. There's always a check-in. In the beginning, I play a lot of games because it really helps me understand their frustration tolerance, what patterns, how they're addressing things. It gives me a great idea about working memory and things like that. And then depending on our goal, it might be if they are newly diagnosed, then some of our sessions will be on just understanding that diagnosis and how is that showing up for you at school? What classes work really well? What teachers are doing things that work really well for you? Have you thought about this pattern? So lots of motivational interviewing and questioning, working on homework. I can't really say that there's a typical session, so they're all a little bit different, but usually about 45 minutes of whatever is most pressing, and then the longer term goals working in there too. Oh, I think we lost Stephanie.
No, she's here. She's here. I think. Oh, no, maybe she's not. Stephanie, do you hear us? No, we don't have a. Julie, but we're going to continue with you. With a young, a younger student.
Right.
I mean, the check-in, I can see that. How long is that? The same 45 minutes?
With the younger student, it depends. Like if their attention span is not going to give me 45 minutes, I want to leave on a positive note. So like there's always, all right, it feels like maybe this is a good time to call it. With the younger students, it's really very student driven. So I really try to pick up on all their cues. And obviously it's a little bit different talking about long-term goals with older students than it is with younger students. We might read, we might do activities. It really just depends on what the goals are, like what my services are providing.
And the goals, let's go back to the goals. So you are setting some goals and how the parents are involved in them, and do they give you goals? Do you give goals? Is that an agreement? I hope it's an agreement, but
right. So that's a good question. Trying to think back. So usually it's a parent coming to me saying, these are the struggles and we need some insight. And as much as I can, I want the goals to be the student's goals. Like I said, my practice is student driven, and often a student's goal, especially middle or high school, their goal might not be the same as their parents' goal for them, right? So I really need it to be student driven. And typically that's me and the student setting goals. If it's a younger kid, I might have to articulate that for them. Like, well, I hear you saying that this is hard, so maybe this is a good goal for that. And with older students, it's usually more clear. Typically, a goal is not just I want to have B's. You know, I want to earn B's this semester. It's usually more specific than that.
Mm-hmm.
And parents are obviously involved. I'm going to tell them, like, these are the goals we talked about. How does that, you know, jive with what your expectations are?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of parent involvement.
I'm going to keep going, waiting for Stephanie to reconnect. What is the main difference for you? I mean, I know that you did in person and virtual. What do you think are the pros and cons? You know, in person, virtual.
Right. So it was hard to transition to virtual in the beginning, obviously for all of us, but now I'm finding it sort of difficult to transition back. Not difficult, but different. The activities that you do are so much different. In person, you can really feel, I mean, you can really pick up on body language, which you can pick up on a camera also, but in person, you really get almost immediate feedback on when you've hit a nerve or when you've touched something that didn't quite land. I need to reword that, or, you know, something like the patterns, like I said, picking up on body language and patterns that seem to be coming back multiple times. So that's one big difference. Also in person, you have a little bit more freedom, it seems, in how you use your time, because you can get up and move around a little bit. Like on virtual, that's a little more difficult, obviously. What else?
Do you have any experience with, I mean, virtual with younger one, like second, third graders? Because you need to have kind of a technique, you know, to share the homework.
Right. You have to be that usually needs a parent. Like a lot of times, depending on how tech savvy they are, you do need a parent to help with that. We use screenshots, so I'll just ask them to hold up their homework and I'll take a screenshot, and then I can share the screenshot and we can annotate right on it. So that is a little bit different. And you have to be really engaging. So I have a tendency, I'm very animated in my face. So like you have to be really engaging with your younger kids and like really expressive to keep their attention, and lots of small like games in the middle. I might start with games with an older kid to get us kind of going, but with a younger kid, I might stop in the middle and add a game, you know, depending on if I can get them back after that or whatever. It's just different for each kid.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. You are an educational therapist. What is the therapy part of your you know, sessions and goals and job?
Yeah. So this is a really good question. So, you know, with educational therapists have to stay in their lane. So it's really important that we're not practicing as licensed professional counselors. Like that's part of our code of ethics. So for me, it really comes down to self-awareness and empowerment of the students, and advocacy, self-advocacy for the students. You know, in my opinion, what we are, like who we are as learners is really like foundational to who we are as humans. And that starts before we're in a classroom, and that extends well beyond the classroom. And kids with learning differences are getting a lot of negative feedback throughout their school day. Like it's not intentional, it just is, because things are hard. And educational therapists know we can't really separate their academic well-being from their social emotional well-being. Like they're developing their inner dialogues, their self-concepts, and most of that is happening in an academic setting. So as an educational therapist, I can help them, you know, understand how they learn and what the barriers, like what's getting in the way for them to be successful, and how can they mitigate that? How can they use their strengths? How can they develop strategies, which really develops their self-awareness? And like I said, that leads to empowerment and advocacy, and that is therapeutic. That affects their whole life, really, and like all of their relationships, even at home relationships between parents and kids who are constantly having homework battles and stuff like that. That is therapeutic because happy kids are just happier. Like it just helps everything, it seems.
Yeah, sure. So what is the partnership with the school? I mean, there's a partnership with the parents. What about with the school? And maybe if you have the experience with public schools and private schools?
It's different. Like every student is different. I prefer to work with the schools through the parents. It seems to be the best avenue. Sometimes it's better for me to go straight to the schools, depending on what the history has been there. If the parents have been trying to get some services and it hasn't been working out. Hi, Stephanie.
Wow.
Uri, we have questions for you too.
Okay, well, sorry about that. I literally have been on Zoom for a while today and I don't know what happened. I'm so sorry to miss, but here I
Maybe
am.
we can finish that one with Julie and then go back to you.
Absolutely.
So we were
Yeah.
talking just about the partnership with the schools.
With the schools.
Okay.
I do offer like 504 support and IEP, like neuroaffirming IEP goals. There is a lot of work with the schools. I tend to do a lot of educational consultation with schools. Like I said, I'd like to go through the parents. It doesn't always work out. Some schools are happy to work with me, and maybe Stephanie's dealt with this. Some schools just really don't want to work with you. Like they don't need another cook in the kitchen, I guess. So it really does vary from school to school and student to student.
Yeah, maybe Stephanie, we can go on the same questions. What is your experience? Partnership with the schools?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Something I did share, I worked for over a decade as an education liaison for Children and Family Services. I worked with 18 school districts and I worked directly with the special ed departments and the SELPA. So I got quite used to working with school teams, but even in that role, where they, kind of were mandated to work with me for the adopted foster youth, there were teams that were super open and happy for support and other teams less so. And then when I was a learning specialist in schools myself, I know that I was incredibly busy, with maybe not even much of a prep period that day. Or I know that my teaching team, I was often the person that would interface between the family, the child, and the teaching team around outside support. So when I'm on the other side of the fence, I'm aware of that, and I know that teachers are limited. So what I do is I usually work with the learning support specialist or case manager. If there's a pressing concern, I ask the parents to maybe reach out to the school to schedule a thoughtful meeting,
Yep.
And something that I do is I create a Google spreadsheet, not spreadsheet, excuse me, a table. And I jot down every session, the date, little notes, things that might be useful. And then I ask the learning support specialist as well as teachers. It's an open document. Would you like me to share that with you? That way I just ping a teacher, I don't have to email them and just say, oops, really had a rough time with this math concept. And that way, I think it allows them to be able to look at things in their own space and time. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we lost you, we were talking about, what the session looks like for you, for your students.
Yeah, well, it's very different if I'm working with a fourth grader versus a high school student that has a massive deadline upon them. But when they're younger and including in middle school, I had one of my high school students say to me the other day, could we play that game you were playing with the other student? So, sometimes we love categories online, love that. It teaches me about how they think about, pulling information, card games, spot it, visual processing, watching. I think Julie said that, watching how they respond. But of course, that's about 5 minutes, as well as getting, a sparkling water or a cup of tea when it's rainy outside. But typically my sessions are 55 minutes. I like to work a little bit longer. Again, it depends on the age of the student. Usually there's some warm-up exercises. And then if I'm with that older student, when we're doing support for more school-based work, part of the process is staying in touch with that teenager about their workflow. Not a lot of communication, but I want that older student to start to communicate with me about where they are in the process. How did if they have a multi-step project, how are they doing in each section of that? Have they met their goals? Are they in trouble? And then, what was I going to say? Yeah, that's probably about right. So there's a little bit more communication with that older student because I want to teach them, embed into that one, how to work with an outside specialist and also support executive function.
Mhm.
Mhm.
What is your part of the therapy in educational therapist? We heard that Julie's part,
Mm. I think the therapeutic part again is boundaried by a knowledge of staying in my wheelhouse of if I'm overly concerned about a student's emotional well-being, I will either be partnering with a person. I will also, I also partner with OTs and speech and language pathologists, and so respect kind of what those specialties do versus what I do, and then try to collaborate so that we don't have too many cooks in the kitchen. You want to make sure that that we're working together and not teaching something in a totally different way than somebody else, that we have the same language and goals and to support the student holistically. And yeah, I mean, I think sometimes with some students, more typically with students that are on the mild autistic spectrum, I think there can be more emotional regulation work, or with students that are struggling more with their success in school. And that's where that can get more emotional and you'll see more of that. And sometimes you also have to work a lot with parents around helping them get support and helping, maybe referring them out to families, especially in things like executive function,
Mhm.
what you can do and what can't be done outside of a session. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and it's just a perfect transition with one question that we have, and please, the parents and listeners, just write your questions in the chat. Somebody is asking, could you give us a few examples of how the parents at home can support the executive functioning with homework, school projects, if they don't have the support of an educational therapist yet, or if you do something, how at home they can reinforce it. I don't know.
So I really like Peg Dawson for her executive function work. And one of her strategies is like compassionate curiosity and motivational interviewing. So one of the things that I do a lot with students is talk about their thinking, like thinking about your thinking. What is your plan? Oh, that was successful. How did you do that? And really bringing attention to what they're doing. Are they planning ahead? Are things catching them off guard? Like, where are they on long-term assignments, and just talking about it. Another really useful thing is, I think, especially kids with learning differences, they're under the impression that the rest of us are not struggling at all. So one great technique is really modeling. So I encourage parents to speak out loud about how you're going to get to that goal that you have. How are you going to do that thing you don't want to do? Like, I want you to verbalize it. I want you to be talking about these things with kids, because it all translates to to their lives too. And if they can see us working through those problems, if we can model that so often, that they have these aha moments, you know, in my sessions with them, I'm like, oh, I think I hear you saying, and I'll repeat back their words to them. And they're like, oh, you know, like there's these moments. So that is something I always try to encourage parents to do too. Like talk to your kids about your own struggles and how you're working through them so that they know that they're not alone. Like the rest of us don't all have it together. You know, everybody is working through something. And that really does help with a lot of executive function. Like metacognition is an executive function, and it can help with emotional regulation. It helps with prioritizing and planning, you know, asking them to sit down and tell you, like write down all the things they have to get done and what are the things that are like urgent, or what are the things that are important but not urgent. Like there's just a lot of thinking through that I think we take for granted, and they need it modeled to them. They need someone to teach them how to do that, and the earlier the better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have any tools that you could recommend? I mean, can be digital, can be calendar, can be that would be the first step. You know, if a parent wants to try to help their students and they want to try something at home first before going to you. Is there any recommendation of specific tools that you're using or recommending to your families?
Stephanie?
Oh, sure. Julia, I really appreciate what you just shared. I also like Pam Dawson, but I also learned about some years ago, because I think executive function, this is social services talk, but it's a family systems-based issue. Oftentimes, executive function impacts the child or teen across all environments, including home. And sometimes a parent may also have some of the same struggles as their child. And so I've also like Maradi Sklar's work. She does executive function, seeing my time. She has been doing this work virtually for a long time. And so she does school-based trainings, family-based trainings, and has wonderful virtual tools. I sometimes will work with a family around learning how to use these, like time doesn't stretch. And one great takeaway I got from her is a family can have a family whiteboard where all members of the family have to write down maybe 3 or 5 chores that are obligations that they have to do in the household. It might be the child or teen has to make sure that they write up their homework and they actually work through the steps of it or ask for help if they don't get it. So I like that modeling again too, where it's not just the kid, but the whole family gets to work on what do I have to do bottom line this week. And it shifts for everybody every week. Other tools I like, it depends. I'm an assistive tech person, so calendars are funny these days because some people love the paper calendars, but I think that's kind of fallen out for a while. A lot of people use digital apps, so I tend to like to work with Google Keep, which I can make checklists and I can share that with a parent. Sometimes schools will block that though. Sharing with outside providers. So, you know, it depends on what I always ask, what device do you have? What device does mom and dad have? What's the easiest way for all of us to communicate? Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, we will share a folder with some resource that Julie and Stephanie are referring to.
Yeah.
I had another question, like, what would you do if one family is coming with a young student, let's say K first, second, with a diagnosis of ADHD, and they said, okay, the academics are so, it's average, so far it's good, but we want to be proactive. Do you think we should work with you? Is that something you would do?
I would say that largely the peds on, right, proactive, right? I would say that really depends on the student, right? So like, especially ADHD kiddos, they just get a lot of feedback, right? Like, and so at some point, I do like to tell parents, and I tell students this too, it might be controversial, but sometimes I'm like, sometimes like you're at your limit, right? And you kind of have to know, we're okay, right? Like more isn't always more. I do think that you have to really be in a position, like you can lead that whole thing, like lead the horse to water or whatever. Like you can provide all sorts of interventions, but if someone's not really in a position to be receptive to it, then, are you just giving more negative feedback, right? Like, is that just more negative feedback for that student? If the student's on board and they're like, no, really, like, I want to do better, I want these grades, and they understand what that means. Like that means you're going to give some more work. Like that means you're going to do more schoolish things at the end of your school day. Then great. Sometimes it's just little barriers. Like I find sometimes with my ADHD students, it's really just a change in the way that they're perceiving something. And it's just not ever been brought to their attention. So it can take a little bit of intervention to make a big difference. So I always fill that out. That's why I meet with the student. I'm like, so how do you feel about working with, like, I know what your parents are looking for. What are you looking for? I think that's a big part of my practice. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned, and again, I very much agree with Julie about the buy-in of the student. But you mentioned the age of the student being very young, which is, in my experience, young to be diagnosed with ADHD.
We do have some kids around kindergarten with a diagnosis.
Right.
And so they want to be proactive. So that's
right.
Yeah. Well, and I think for one thing I really look at with a younger student, or actually with an older student, I'll tell a funny story from last night, is time of day. And really paying attention to what they can actually handle. Like if they're seeing me and they're a little child at 5 o'clock and they've run out of steam, I'm not sure that's the best usage for that child's time, that it would be better to play and to do something, a sport, and to relax. But because I do work with older students, last night his teacher gave him a very long set of work problems, like 20 or 30, which was very unusual for this teacher. And he has ADHD. His meds are completely worn off. The name of the game is get a cup of tea. And last night he was having a hard time focusing. He says, do you mind if I play some music? I was like, absolutely, please do. So we listened to John Coltrane. And then we switched to punk. But you know what? He got through all the quadratic equations he had to do. And he had this takeaway moment. He said, you didn't mind? I said, no, I don't care. I like music. I'm fine with that. Did it work for you? And he said, it did. It helped me lock in. I locked in. So I'm open, as long as nobody gets hurt, they're relatively productive. I have a pretty big bandwidth for looking at strategies for self-regulation and for trying to refocus and gain the ability to get work done at the end of the day, which I think is particularly difficult for kids that take medication and it wears off in the evening. Yeah.
Do you think there's a preferred age to start, working with an educational therapist, considering that you're working on, that embracing their neurodiversity, on self-advocacy. And it's true that with the young ones, I mean, after school, they're ready for bed or play. Do you have a preferred age that you would, recommend to start?
So I actually have a new student that's going to be in person, and he is 7 with ADHD. And like I met with him last week and I kind of told him what I do, and he was all for it. He was like, oh, you're going to learn. I was like, I get to learn all about you. I'm going to figure out like what you really like and what's really working for you. And he's on board, right? So like I do think the self-advocacy and the self-awareness piece, the earlier the better, because you know, I think there's a statistic that by the age of 12, someone with ADHD has gotten 20,000 negative comments, you know, and that's significant. And that is, like I said, that really is developing their self-concept and all the things. If they have an awareness that if they're like, oh yeah, sometimes I such and such, but I have ADHD, like it's not an excuse, but it is an explanation. And it is something that a diagnosis or an understanding of that diagnosis or not, I do think that that promotes more self-awareness. And if they're available in whatever capacity, then the younger the better.
Yeah.
My opinion.
I can piggyback on that. I find that if I can get a student, well, because I don't tend to see K through 2, is rare. That's just not my wheelhouse at this point in my career. But let's say I get a student that's already showing, you know, signs of a dyslexic profile. The sooner you get in there and start to work on decoding and spelling and the whole piece that goes on there, the better. And the same with math, because all too often I'll get students coming to me in middle school who have terrific gaps in their knowledge. And of course we can use AI and we can use assistive technology to get them, like, let's say spelling is problematic in a middle school kid. I'll often say, well, let's do intensive remediation during the summer and go through some of these spelling patterns. But again, if you can catch things earlier and get in there, I'm a great believer that most students can learn to do math and thrive in mathematics as long as they've got the concepts.
Mhm.
They've moved through the concrete to semi-concrete to abstract in good order, and that they're not playing catch up. Yeah, as they go through school.
And they have a positive self-concept. So like, I do think positive self-concept. So what's the statistic for girls? It's 3rd grade. Like by 3rd grade, basically the age where girls decide that they're not good at math. And that affects all the way through middle school and high school. So positive self-concept certainly makes learning easier.
When do you think that, when do you say, oh, I think we're done with my health? You know,
yeah. When do they graduate?
when does it graduate? And what's the average length of you working with students? Years?
Yeah. For me, it's years. I mean, I try to tell parents, like, I'm not a miracle worker, so expect 3 months minimum, semester minimum. Most of the students I work with for extended periods of time. I do have, let's see, I think last year I graduated 3 kiddos going into high school, so sophomores. They just really they had really good habits. They had figured out what they need. They were really good at self-advocating. They were messaging teachers. They were messaging teachers before class started. Like, these are the things that work really well for me. These are the strategies. Like, we had gotten them there. I still do check-ins with them. I still regularly talk to them. They know that if something comes up, that they, you know, can contact me and we work together. So really, it's just about accomplishing those goals. And in mine, it's a little different. I think Stephanie and I have a little bit different of a practice. It's just mine is a lot of that self-advocacy piece and seeing what they need to be able to keep going without as much like scaffolding support. So when they get to the point where they can really provide that support and they've got those things in place for themselves and they need less support from me, then they can graduate.
What about
yeah. On my side, yeah, like I often will have students that stay with me for quite a few years. Sometimes middle school kids that have come to me will graduate at some point in high school. They'll say, you know what, I feel I'm ready to take on this junior seminar course. I feel strong, and it'll just happen naturally over time. You know, they'll need less scaffolding, they'll need less, they've built their confidence up, and hopefully also worked with the learning support team, worked with learning how to advocate for themselves. A lot can happen with maturation.
Mhm.
And also though, sometimes students, like I've have an experience where I've worked with a student on math from 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, had some real bumps along the way, but then she just caught on fire in this last semester. And so does she need to see me next year? Maybe it's just one time a week,
Mhm.
right? So it's that you can sometimes see students grow in their skill and ability in something like math or writing, and then it's appropriate to let them graduate.
Right.
Is that kind of like a minimum, like at least twice a week, or is that too sporadic? It fits like once a week or once every 2 weeks. Is that something that
question.
you don't do because it's too spread out? The frequency.
I would say if I'm working with a student and I'm working specifically on like reading goals or writing
Mhm.
goals, then once a week isn't great. You know, like if that's all we can get, okay, we're still building skills. But I'd like to see that person twice a week. If we're working on executive function or if we're working on just keeping up with homework and stuff like that, sort of depends on the student's schedule and like I don't like the word urgency, but a sense of urgency, right, on how quickly they need some support for once a week or twice a week. I most of my students right now I actually see once a week. Well, no, I take that back. I think it's about half and half. So it really just depends.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, similar. I have some students that see me once a week. They are relatively successful in getting their work done. Maybe some glitches along the way, or for example, with one student, science has gotten more difficult. So we're putting our money in that that area right now. And then the rest is trying to teach that student, once a week, how to manage her deadlines over the week. That works for that sort of student. But I think if you want to move the dial in areas such as mathematics or being able to read and spell, you probably are going to need twice a week during the school year. I don't usually see kids more than that just because most of my students are very busy and active people. Yeah.
Somebody is asking in the chat, if you could give a few examples, if you have some, to help self-regulation and to refocus when they start to do homework and then it starts to be longer and longer as they start to go get a snack and on the way to, put on the music and change the music a lot. So any tip to help them to refocus, re-engaged?
So like in the moment, I have a few strategies. I try to tell students, my middle and high school students, like to set a timer, especially so they're usually avoiding the hard things, right? Like sometimes they'll call them boring, but usually it's a mismatch between what they think they should be able to do on this assignment and worrying or anxiety about being able to meet that expectation. So like that ultimately, in my opinion, is a lot of procrastination. So set a timer and try the hard thing for 10 minutes, right? Like for a lot of kids, it's initiation, like just get started. Usually it's not as bad as you think it is. At the end of 10 minutes, like the timer goes off. If you're ready to take a break, take a break. If you're not, keep focused, and then you can just really try to extend that time depending on what their capacity is. But the deeper work is for me trying to figure out why they're avoiding those, like why are they putting things off, why are they avoiding those homeworks, assignments, like what's happening in that moment in time. Are they hungry? Do they need a change of scenery? Do they need to do something when they get home from school before they start their homework? Lots of times it's environmental things that can be like just a predictor for that behavior, or just a conversation about what they're afraid of with the homework. Like I said, that expectation and anxiety, lots, students with learning differences often I find have a discrepancy. So there's something that they're very good at, and then there's things that they're not very good at. And that gap really causes a lot of anxiety. And we procrastinate when we're anxious. We avoid things when we're anxious. So lots of times there's deeper conversations there. But any little strategy, like a 10-minute timer, or go do something, for ADHD, go do some jumping jacks or something really active before you start your homework. It really depends on the student.
Mhm.
Yeah. And quickly, because I know we're running out of time, I so much wish, and this is what I miss about not working, about not being in a school where I'm seeing a student early in the day.
Mhm.
A lot of times, I will try to understand the students' personality as well as when they are most effective. And again, a lot of time we're seeing kids after school.
Yeah.
Which can be difficult for students. But sometimes what I'm also doing is strategizing with them about one, yes, prioritizing tasks, but also digging into why it's hard to start. Anxiety you could be the best writer in the world and be paralyzed by how to start.
Mhm.
And so that's deep work, deep dialogue. Again, because we have little time, I sometimes work with the Pomodoro technique, which is the 20-minute magic zone. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But again, it's really a deep conversation with the student and sometimes the parents about when to stop working and when to go to bed and when to stop so that they don't get wound up, so that they don't practice frustration. I don't want a student to experience deep frustration when approaching a task, because sometimes that gets embedded and then it snowballs. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What would be that would be maybe a last I don't think we have another question, but we're going to wrap up. Just an idea. You see a lot of students, so in terms of homework, time for homework, let's say middle school, because we're not going to high school. What would you say maximum, including the breaks? Would you say 2 hours? Would you say less? It's hard. It's a hard question, but just to
I
get
worked,
an idea for the parents, because I
yeah.
know in our middle school we have a lot of homework, and that's a complaint we have very often. It's like, yeah, there's too much homework, but also there's the executive functioning part that is also happening, because when you spread out or chunk your big project over several weeks, then it's less homework. So yeah, I'm just the devil advocate.
Oh, homework is a tough one. So kids are at school, it's a full-time job. So they're at school all day and they come home from school and they are kids. And so I understand homework challenges. I understand that there's expectations and grades involved, and I get that. I always try to tell parents to focus on the relationship, which for me, that's like the bigger part, right? Like, focus on the relationship. So if you're having constant homework battles, I would tell them like figure something different out, right? Like, and it looks different for different kids. Some kids come home from school and they're like, nope, I just got to stay in school mode. I'm just going to stay focused. I can't take a break. Some kids need a break. I think the recommendation, I mean, like, there's a lot of, I'm not going to get too much into my opinion on homework, but there's, 10 minutes. Well, what do they say? Like an hour middle school, an hour of homework.
I think you start 10 minutes in first grade, right? And
yeah. So like an hour of middle school, and different kids have different capacities. Some kids come home from school, they're out of spoons. They have nothing left to give in that capacity. So I know I sometimes recommend to kids to get up early before school if that's an easier time to get homework done. So it really does vary from student to student.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, quickly. Sometimes I see kids during 0 periods.
Yeah,
before school starts. I'm not always sure. Very many people, including myself, of course, I get to have coffee, but that can be a tricky time. But something I forgot to share, when I have older students or even middle school students, I try to say, hey, are you a person who likes to do your work alone, or are you motivated by having a really cool peer or sitting? I love the word parallel parallel working where maybe a trusted adult, somebody they get along with, is doing their taxes or doing their bills or doing something. And then there's the student sitting there doing their homework, because some students really need other people to help motivate them to push through things. So that's something you can do at home, or, older kids can go to a cafe with a friend. What do college students do, right? That's why they're in that cafe, because there's other people around them.
Yeah.
That's a good tip. Yeah.
Body doubling. That is a good strategy.
Mhm.
Well,
Want to
with
wrap up?
that,
Well,
Benedicte, I think we're hitting the time wall here.
Yeah. Mhm.
7:31. We certainly appreciate all of you, Julie, Steph, Benedicte as well, for giving us your time this evening to talk about this. It's been very helpful. And we fielded a couple of questions. You guys were super insightful in terms of this topic. And hopefully we all learned something tonight. So Benedicte's going to send out some additional information. She'll make it available to everybody, both about some of the resources and topics we talked about, and specifically how you can connect with Julie and Stephanie. But thank you all for coming, and we appreciate it, and have a great evening.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.